Right, well, it's 5 past. Shall we get started, Rik? Have I shared your screen?
Yeah.
Let's.
Yeah. Oh, you've done it, haven't you?
Yeah.
There we go. I'm just going to start with a very, very quick couple of slides just for the background about why we're going to go through this and what the benefit is for potentially for your own photography. So I'm just going to rattle through this bit because I think the Photoshop components are going to take a little bit longer than we thought. So obviously all of us know taking photographs that one of the primary challenges that you face in astrophotography is obtaining signal and minimizing noise. And although we all think about noise sort of automatically as we photograph, and noise comes in lots of guises, it can be noise that's generated by the equipment, sensor noise or thermal noise from camera equipment or dust on various parts of the optical train. We less so think about signal, and I think the talk that I was going to give today and the image that I've chosen to process, it's all about thinking about the signal itself. And I think that one of the most important elements when thinking about both acquiring your images and also processing your images is thinking about the dynamic range of both the target that you're photographing and the components of that field of view. So for example, as to dynamic range, if I think most of us are probably aware of what dynamic range is, but I think about dynamic range as basically the range between the dimmest pixels and the brightest pixels that form the useful signal of the image. So if you imagine, a globular cluster, for example, that might have low dynamic range because actually all of the useful signal that we're going to capture is going to be found within a very narrow range of pixel brightnesses. Whereas other objects, in fact, lots of targets that we photograph are going to have a high dynamic range because there are going to be dim components to the image that are useful. For example, interstellar dust. But you may also, within the same field of view, have very bright components of the image, stars, bright cores of galaxies, for example. And that's important to know. And I think we've all been there with Orion, for example, with the Orion Nebula, where you might change the way you acquire your images. So you might take, say, short exposures and long exposures and then blend them afterwards to optimize that dynamic range. But also it's important when thinking about how you process things. And I found, as I've done more and more processing in the year and a half since I started, that actually using a processing workflow which selectively extracts various components to the image according to dynamic range is kind of one of the more effective ways of processing these objects. So tonight I was actually going to do 2 images. I think we're probably only going to get to the Pleiades one, but as Martin's alluded to, I think processing the Pleiades wide field image is going to be more useful than the dumbbell, and I think most of the principles are applicable to both. And as I said, the common theme of the presentation is going to be about selective processing to achieve balance across a wide range of a wide dynamic range. And predominantly it's going to be about the careful use of masks and layer masks to achieve that. So I know that some of you use PixInsight, and I know that masking and layer masking is a part of PixInsight. Obviously, the way that it works in Photoshop is going to be different, but I think that the principles of what I'm going to go through should be applicable to various processing softwares. Just before I continue, I'm going to just load up Photoshop. Who's not familiar with layer masks as part of their processing workflow? Is anyone not familiar with it? Because I will, depending on what the response is to that, I will decide on how we'll do. No, everyone's on mute.
I have used them in experimentation, but I don't use them routinely.
Okay. Fine. Okay, so I take it you guys can all see Photoshop now. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah. So this is an image, wide field image of the Pleiades that I took last week. Actually, I think it was Thursday last week, so it wasn't even that long ago. It's shot at 85mm focal length using a Samyang prime lens. Its native or its lowest f-stop is f1.4, but I shot this at f4 just to optimize sort of star quality and minimize chromatic aberration. And the image, this is an auto stretched image that's been stacked and it's come out of APP as it is, with a bit of gradient and light pollution removal, which I'm not going to go through this time round. But this is how it's come out of APP. I think it's 51 minutes exposure, so it's 17 3-minute exposures at f4. And if you think back to what we talked about beforehand, so if you think about the dynamic range of this target and this field of view, so if you think about the signal, so the useful signal, the things that we care about are the stars. So we want the stars to be sharp, small, not overexposed. We want there to be color, adequate color in the stars. And there is some color, you know, I think at 3 minutes at f4, some of the stars are slightly overexposed and blown out. But there is some color, there's some blue color here. You get diffraction spikes because obviously I've stopped the lens down. But if you look at this star, for example, there's decent amount of color signal in that star that's known to be orange. So we've got useful signal in the stars. We have got some noise in the background, and we have, why is my image not centered now? Let me just recenter that. That's weird. It's gone off to the right. That doesn't normally happen. Let me just go fit screen.
Just hit Control-0.
Control-0. Okay. Yeah. No, I think I've not used it in this full screen mode, but I've managed to get it back to center by clicking fit screen. So anyway, so we've said that the stars is useful, but also there is lots and lots of interstellar dust in this field of view, and I'm just going to show you, just so you understand where this has all come from, a processed version of this that I posted recently. So let me just get the JPEG up. So this is kind of what we're aiming for. And if you look compared to that original image, we have got the stars, we've got color, we've got interstellar dust, and in order to achieve that faint signal, because that's part of that dynamic range, the interstellar dust, we need to selectively process this image. So, oh God, I shouldn't have used this full screen view. I need to just get back out of this. Let me just close this one now.
Always dangerous to do it just before you've actually set up your presentation.
So the first thing to say is that if you try to process this in order to achieve good signal with the interstellar dust, and you try to preserve the stars simultaneously by stretching the image for the dust as it is, you would not make a good job of it. So just for example, so this is your histogram. So you'll all be familiar with the histogram. On the left side of your histogram is the lowest brightness values. So 0 is down here on the bottom left, and you've got 255, which is over here on the right. So a 255 brightness pixel basically means that the red, green, and blue pixels are at the maximum brightness value, and that's absolute white. Conversely, the left side is absolute dark. So as for lots of astrophotos, most of the brightness values are on this left side, kind of darkish, and then you get this negative exponential curve, and you get lesser and lesser bright pixels. And obviously down here, where you've got lots of bright pixels, where the stars are. And if you were to stretch this by pulling this up, you will see that if I go quite aggressive with it, you will see that although the stars are overexposed, you can actually see, particularly down here on the bottom left and maybe midsection on the right, and at the top, that there is some interstellar dust. But you just can't selectively do it like that. So the first thing that I did for this image is I ran this through a software which would remove stars. So you've got options. You can use StarNet. I use Star Exterminator for this, and because it takes a couple of minutes to process, I've just pre-prepped it. And after removing the stars, you can see that this is the image that comes out. I do have this a little bit of artifact in here, but just ignore that for now. Now, if I don't know if it projects well, you know, with the screen share, but can you see a bit of interstellar dust there, Martin or Russ? Can you see it? Yeah, you can see there that actually just by removing the stars, we can now see that there's some interstellar dust. You've got a bit of reflection nebulosity, which is again part of the useful signal, and it's there. So what I want to do next is I've now got a standard layer, which is at the bottom there, the background one. I've got a starless layer, and we need to create another layer in which basically just contains the stars on their own. Okay, we'll put the starless layer there. So now what we can do is we know that this layer is basically the same as the layer below, except it doesn't have any stars. So if we change the blend mode here to either subtract or difference, we can then just get a layer that just contains the stars, if that makes sense, kind of like a arithmetic. And you can see that that looks pretty good. There's stars there, the sky's black, and it looks just like there's just stars, okay? So we will rename this stars, and we're just gonna clone stamp this using shortcut, and we'll pop that on the top, and we'll use that later on. So we're going to pop that up later on. Let's just get rid of that, and this image, this layer is actually called stars. Sorry, so that's just stars, and we're going to leave that as it is. And we're going to work next on the starless layer. So ignore the star layer at the top. We'll use that a bit later on. So I think that most of you who use Photoshop would normally, if you want to create a layer mask, so a layer mask basically allows you to selectively control what's visible above and below a layer, or should I say just below a layer, would normally use something called the select color range tool. So I know that Russ, for example, will be familiar with this, and others may be familiar. And normally what you would do is you would pick, you could pick, you know, highlight value, for example, and you could try and find a highlight value which picks up just the dust on its own. And I tried this, and I just could not find a fuzziness and range value that would allow me to pick up the dust. That's not too bad, but it's not perfect. Similarly, you can choose a sample color. So for example, if we wanted to just pick up some dust, which I can't physically see, we knew that there's some down here, again, can't seem to get a decent yield on it. So what I did instead is I used something called a threshold adjustment layer. And what this does is it contains the histogram. So again, this histogram represents the brightness values of the pixels in this image. And you can slide this slider of the threshold adjustment value to find just where the dust should be as visible as it just visible. So if you look here, you can see that this is a classic pattern of Pleiades dust, can't you? You can see that there, and it's probably just about more visible there. I think that's probably a little bit too much. So we'll choose, maybe we could choose 44. So let's choose this threshold layer of 44, and we'll press enter, okay? In fact, no, what I need to do first is I need to stamp this layer, because we need a second copy of that actually. And we'll stamp it again, actually. Yeah, we'll stamp it twice. Okay, so we're going to run that threshold layer now on the top, on that top one. So it was threshold layer, and we said we were going to choose a value of 45, didn't we? We said was a good option. And we press OK, and this is what we'll use as a layer mask. So a layer mask in Photoshop always has a black and white image. The white stuff will be selectively processable, as in it'll be visible on the top layer, and the stuff that's in black or dark is not going to be affected. So because we've created a mask now that contains the bright parts of the Pleiades and some of the very, very faint interstellar dust, we can now selectively stretch the dust independent of the background sky. So what we'll do is we'll select that entire image, copy it, and we will, stop me if I'm going too fast, guys, by the way. And we will, on one of these starless layers, the top starless layer, we'll create a layer mask, which is this button on the bottom. So it says add layer mask. We'll click that, and we will paste into this layer mask the threshold adjustment layer that we just created. And that's going to be our layer mask now, okay? And we're going to feather this because we don't want when we stretch for the dust, we don't want the transition between the dust and the background sky to be very, very harsh, because it will start to look a bit artificial. So I think probably a feather of, yeah, maybe we'll call it that. So that's 17 pixels is probably just about right. So you see how the transition now between the dark and the bright parts of the layer mask is a little bit fluffier. And now, if we start, now that this layer mask is active, only the parts that are in white on that layer mask are going to be stretchable. So we can now use our curves to stretch, and you'll see as we stretch this, just move this across here. And you'll see now as we stretch this, you'll see that just the dust is stretched. You see that? See how it's just getting slightly brighter? So we can maybe just do a couple of iterations of this, just very subtle. And we want to just be keeping an eye on the dust itself. It's a little bit noisy at the moment. We're going to run denoise in a second. I can probably do one more actually, and maybe just with a little S curve just to give it a little bit of extra contrast. So we'll just pull it up just a touch, and then we'll just pull down just a tiny bit as well. Yeah. So is that pretty clear that the dust has now become quite visible just through a judicious creation of a layer mask that contains that faint signal? I'm just going to show you just as we go along that we have this star mask now, and if we change the blend mode of that star mask to linear dodge add, you can actually see that we've now got fairly nice signal in the stars, but we also have visible dust at the background already just through that one single intervention. And the image is fairly, I would say it's fairly nice at the moment, even as it is, without any further processing. But we'll turn that off for now because we're going to work on this layer a bit more. So once we're happy with the signal in the dust, we're going to stamp that, and we can get rid of the that one there. And now we've got what we've stretched without a layer mask active. So what I would normally do in this scenario is I would run denoise. And I remember back to last year, Martin said he read that if you run some form of denoise software early in your processing, you can often end up with a better result. And I found that if you run denoise carefully throughout your process, paying attention to the image, that you can actually end up with a better result. So I'm not going to do too much with this, to be perfectly honest. I'm just going to let it do its standard processing. I often use default settings, but I often use a remove noise and sharpen value around 20. So I'm just going to run that just for a second. It shouldn't take too long. In the interim, I'm happy to just take any questions about layer masks, or if there's anything that you wanted to ask about that threshold adjustment layer, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily use that function in Photoshop.
I think one thing we could possibly ask you to do is if you could make the initial file available, then we could actually run through what this tutorial with your original.
Definitely. I can either share all of the raw files, or I can share that auto stretch TIFF.
Just the TIFF. Just start at the TIFF point. I mean, it could even just be the JPEG, I would imagine.
Yeah,
doesn't have to be, if you just put it on Messenger or something, that might be enough to do it.
I think the other thing that I'd like to just say while this is processing is that I think the fact that the dust was so visible, even just with 51 minutes integration, is a function of the fact that this is shot from Bortle 3 skies. Because again, if we think about environmental contributors to noise, I think light pollution is not with that degree, not with that length of integration, is not going to allow you to photograph the very, very dim but useful signal. So I didn't mention that at the start, but this was shot from Bortle 3, which was certainly a big help.
I have to say that when I first looked at that, I wasn't certain it was dust or noise. And when I look at some of my images, I wonder, is that actually something I want, or is it something I don't want?
Yeah, well, it's definitely dust, because I've seen much better images, and it's that pattern that you see kind of emanating out from the right side of the I'm not sure what the bright star is called with the nebulosity, and the left, that is interstellar dust. That we've just created. Yeah,
I wasn't doubting it. I meant my own images. When I see that effect, I think maybe I shouldn't have that.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Noise is more uniform across the whole image.
Say that again, Russ.
I think if it was noise, it would be much more uniform across the whole image.
Yeah, no, that's true. So we've denoised that a little bit now. And the next thing that I would do is I would say, I'm not sure how it looks on your screen, but I would say that there is a little bit of a green overtone here. So I would just use camera raw to just selectively desaturate the green, because in my opinion, and again, just going off the images that I've seen, space dust, when you've stretched it, it should be sort of more brown. So we'll just go to camera raw and we'll just take the saturation on the greens down to just get the image to just be a little bit better balanced. So we'll just take that down. Very subtle change, but it's
Rik.
Yeah.
What's the
crosshatch
on my screen? The crosshatch.
Yeah. It's an artifact of this Star Exterminator plugin that I'm using.
All right.
It's just an artifact, but you've done well to pick that up, actually, because you can see it pretty clearly. If I go to a threshold adjustment layer, you can see that there's this crisscrossy rubbish. Well, you can't actually see it there, but there is some crisscrossy stuff, which I think it's a software glitch with the Star Exterminator. It doesn't happen with StarNet, but I just hadn't got around to using StarNet on this image. So just ignore that crosshatch. It's just something.
I was
not the camera software.
I was starting to think it was the Bayer matrix, you know.
No. It's way too big to be the Bayer matrix. Yeah. So yeah, it is a bit strange.
Why didn't you use StarNet?
It was just I just didn't have time. This is pretty quick, so, and I was trying to pre-prep it in time, so I wasn't very well prepared. So the next thing that I would do on this image is I would start to then work on the star. So I'm happy with that kind of as it is. It's a little bit noisy, but we'll sort that out later if we need to. But I would then work on the stars. So if we go up to the star layer, change the blend mode back to normal. How much time have we got? We've got a little bit of time on 13 minutes. Yeah. So we'll duplicate the star layer. And what I want to do now is I want to just add a little bit of vibrance to the stars, and I want to minimize the stars a little bit. So again, we can use a layer mask for this. This time around, we will use the select color range tool, and we'll use the highlights selection. So if we pull this range slider down, you'll find that you'll get more stars. That's okay, actually. We'll zoom in. Yeah, so the stars are selected. They've got a decent amount of diameter or slight radius around the stars. And then again, using that selection, we're going to create a layer mask. So if you have a selection there visible and you click create layer mask, what you'll get is you'll get a layer mask of that selection. So you see that here. So that's your stars basically. And we're going to feather it just a touch, 2 pixels. Yeah, that looks okay. And then we're going to reselect what we're working on, and we're just going to, again, you can do this, you can take a lot of time over this, but I'm just going to push the vibrance just a touch. We just touch the saturation up. Well, then we're then going to stamp that, so that's our new stars. Duplicate, and we'll just get rid of the old 2 because we don't need those now. It's going to confuse us otherwise. And then I just want to show you how I would minimize the stars. So minimizing the stars and is basically the purpose. And you again, you'll have all done this, is to just allow the main subject of the deep sky image to be more apparent. And I don't think this requires too much star minimization, but I'm just going to show you what I would do for this, because when I processed this, I thought, well, I want to minimize some of these background stars, but I don't really want to minimize the Pleiades because that's a part of the main subject. So again, you can use a layer mask to do that. So again, we're going to select our color range. We've got that right selection there anyway. We'll create that same layer mask. And what we can do now is we can select the layer mask and feather it as we did before. But if I don't want the Pleiades to be affected by the star minimization, I can, just on the layer mask, I can just delete them from the layer mask themselves. So now I know that whatever adjustment I make on this layer mask is not going to affect the Pleiades specifically. I don't know if that makes sense. And then now that we've got that selection active, we can just click filter, other, minimum. And I would normally just minimize by probably around 0.7 pixels. And that will just very slightly minimize the stars, but it will not be touching the Pleiades stars because the Pleiades stars are not there on the layer mask, if that makes sense. So then we'll stamp that. Get rid of these two. And now with our minimized stars that have had some vibrance added to them, we can then just re-add them back to the image. And now this is looking a bit better. So that's looking a bit better. Now I would take this off, and I think the background sky could be a little bit darker. I know that Russ and Paul will agree with me. So we'll just darken the background sky just a touch, making sure that we don't clip any of this left side of the histogram, so we can just darken that up. The dust is still visible. Looks a bit better. We'll have a look at what that looks like. So we're getting there now. It's a little bit closer to the original image that we showed. Yeah, looks okay actually. And we could probably do a bit of denoise on this. Has anyone used high pass filters?
Yeah.
Russ probably has, yeah.
Yeah.
So high pass filters are a good way of enhancing contrast within your image. And again, if you use layer masks, you can selectively choose what you're going to add contrast to. So what I would say that I'm happy probably actually with this image as it is, and I'm going to stamp all of that together. So now if we stamp everything that's visible, we've now got a layer. This layer now at the top, which is labeled layer 5, contains the dust, the background sky, and the stars as they are. And what I would say is if we added a little bit of contrast to this sort of diffuse nebulosity around the Pleiades, it might just add something a little bit to the image. So what we can do now is we can duplicate this and create another layer mask. This time around, we're just going to invert the layer mask so it's black. Now what we can do is no, in fact, let me just ignore that. Sorry.
We've got 5 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, I know, I'm rushing now. So what we're going to do is we're going to selectively apply a little bit of contrast to this image. So we've got 2 layers, they're identical. The top layer, we're going to go on filter, other. No, we're not. What we're going to do, oh yeah, there, filter, other, high pass. We're going to select a radius which just includes a bit of nebulosity, so a little bit higher than that. We're looking at the middle here, probably less than that. Let's go 18. 18 will be fine. And we'll change the blend mode to overlay. Now what you'll see is it's massively increased contrast across the whole image. That's not what we wanted because now it looks a bit over sharpened, overblown out. So if we create a layer mask on this layer, invert it, everything now has gone back to before we did the overlay filter, the high pass filter, but now we can paint on the layer mask using a white brush the areas that we want a little bit of extra contrast in. So let's just increase this radius just a touch, and then we can just paint on a little bit of extra contrast around the stars and around the Pleiades, and you can do that anywhere in the image essentially. And that's about it. I know that it's not exactly what we ended up with. I did a little bit of extra saturation enhancements, maybe a bit more denoise, maybe a little bit more color adjustments to get rid of some greens and enhance the blues. But that's essentially what I wanted to go through in terms of stretching for faint detail. And you can use the same principle for any target that's got high dynamic range. If you select using a layer mask the faint stuff whilst preserving the bright stuff and then selectively stretch that, you can do it that way around. I don't really want to take up any more time. I know it's not quite a finished image, but I thought it'd be worth us just having 5 minutes for questions and comments, because I think that might be of better yield than going through just as minor adjustments from here. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's definitely helpful because it's recorded and I'm going to watch it again.
Yeah.
I can't possibly take it all in one go.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
And obviously you are going fairly quickly to meet the deadline. So first thing I would like to say is thanks very much, because we might just get cut off at any point. It has been useful, and the recording will appear on the website. We've just got 3.5 minutes left. Because we're using these free versions of Zoom, we only get 40 minutes. And of that 40 minutes, 5 minutes at least is taken up with getting set up. Do people think having two 40-minute sessions is the way to go with this, so we don't actually try and rush it too much? Or is 40 minutes just enough? What do people think?
I think it depends on the night. If we've got what presentation we have.
Yeah. But it's nice to have a bit of a social chat as well, isn't it? Which we're just not going to have time for tonight, because we're going to get cut off in 2 minutes. Anyway, so the thing is that if Rik could make the file available, we could all have our own little go at that if we want to. I mean, I'd like to have a go at it. So the stretch TIFF file. It's just this process of repeating layer masks and stamping and stuff like that. I've just got to get more into that, which I'm not particularly into at the moment. When I do my birding stuff, I'm not doing all that stuff. So these are new techniques for me, really, in Photoshop. I do understand the concepts, but I haven't actually put them into practice myself. So thanks very much for it, Rik. Has anybody else got anything to say?
Thanks very much. This is really, really informative. Thank you.
Yeah. Just
cheers.
just very much helps with selective processing, but I think it's just a familiarity thing. I think the penny didn't drop for me for a while after using layer masks, because it's a little bit abstract when you're not used to it, but it does come. It's just practice, I guess.
Yeah.
When you come to sharpening, the selective mask is really important, I think, on the stars, because if you over sharpen stars, they look awful. They're really gaudy and rubbish. So using that selection on stars, the sharpening is a definite must.
The other thing to say, even if you do use these sharpening tools, as long as you've got an identical layer below what you've done, you can always just change the opacity and just make it more subtle. If you're not happy with something but you're unsure, just flip a coin and decide.
Opacity with layers is one of my main friends, is when just getting the bit that you want to show and not all of it to show, things like that. Can I just say, we've got a minute left. Andy has very kindly agreed to do a mosaic presentation on Nina, but also a bit of a refresher on Nina, because some of us might be considering using it. I know Mark uses Nina, I know Andrew uses Nina. I've got it loaded, but I actually don't use it at the moment. So he's given us a refresher, but with a particular emphasis on doing mosaics. So we're going to end up just disappearing in a minute, but thanks everybody for coming tonight. A good session from Rik there, and it will appear in video format at some point on the web. Have another look at it.
Thanks, Rik. Thanks.
I mean, well, I think these meetings are great. It's good as a social thing as well. It's just a shame we haven't got more time. Perhaps we should consider getting a subscription. I don't know. We'd have to then have subs and things and be a proper society.